Thanks for checking out the weekly sermon from Church of the Resurrection. I pray that God will use this message to speak to you and help you grow in your faith journey. If you're in the KC area, I'd like to invite you to join us next week at one of our services, or join us in live worship online at core.org/worship. Church of the Resurrection is one church in multiple locations. To learn more about the service times in our ministries, please visit core.org. Hope you enjoy this week's message.
Our passage today is from the Gospel of Luke. Taking the disciples with him, Jesus withdrew privately to a city called Bethsaida. When the crowds figured it out, they followed him. He welcomed them, spoke to them about God's kingdom, and healed those who were sick. When the day was almost over, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so that they can go to the nearby villages and countryside and find lodging and food, because we are in a deserted place." He replied, "You give them something to eat." But they said, "We have no more than 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all these people." They said this because about 5,000 men were present. Jesus said to his disciples, "Seat them in groups of about 50. They did so, and everyone was seated. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. Everyone ate until they were full, and the disciples filled 12 baskets with the leftovers. May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of Scripture. You may be seated.
The Gospel of Luke records 7 meals that Jesus eats with others. Discover your place at Jesus' table. Breaking bread with Jesus, food and life in the Gospel of Luke.
I'd like to invite you to take your bulletin, and you'll find on the back side a place to take notes, and I'd love to invite you to write down the things you want to remember and reflect upon in the coming week. I promise you this, if you're paying attention somewhere, God will speak to you in today's text and today's message. Beneath that, you'll find our daily scripture readings, and as a congregation, we are reading through the Gospel of Luke together during the season of Lent. So what happens is, on Monday, you'll have a chance to reread the scripture from today, and then every day thereafter, we're going to pick up where we left off the scripture in the Gospel of Luke last week. So we're going to start with Luke chapter 3, and we're going to go all the way through Luke chapter 6 this week. I want to encourage you to take the time to read the Bible on your own. If you don't have a Bible, we'll give you one for free. Stop by the Connection Point. We'll be happy to give one to you there. So today we turn to another gospel story about Jesus breaking bread with people. This entire sermon series during the season of Lent, we're looking at these 7 meals, and there's actually 9, but 2 of them, there's just a nod to them in the gospel, but 7 meals at which Jesus is breaking bread with or eating with people in his day. The disciples, Pharisees, the multitudes, and as we're looking at these stories, we're remembering that some of the most important events in our lives take place over meals. So tonight is our birthday celebration for our granddaughter, Stella. She is 6 years old today, and so we're going to gather together at 5 o'clock, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to eat. We're going to eat, and then we're going to open presents. Or we might open presents and eat. I'm not sure which. But we're going to do those 2 things today. And across the course of our life, most of the powerful memories we have somehow involve food. And so it was true in Jesus' ministry. So often he's eating with people, breaking bread with them. You remember the Latin for breaking bread with someone is companere, from which we have our word companion. He was companioning with people as he was breaking bread. We turn today to a story of Jesus breaking bread with 5,000 people. Actually, probably more than that. 5,000 men plus women and children. Who knows, maybe 10,000 people, but let's just say 5,000. We'll stick with that for a second. And as we think about this story, it was so important that the gospel writers all included it in their gospels. It's the only miracle story that appears in all 4 gospels other than the resurrection of Christ. In fact, it appears 6 times in the 4 gospels because there are 2 other stories where Jesus, or one other story where Jesus feeds this time 4,000 people instead of 5. Matthew and Mark record that account as well. So 6 feeding of thousands of people, just a handful of loaves and fish recorded in the gospels. Why was this story so important that it was recorded in all 4 gospels? Why was it important to the early church? And then what does it mean for us today? That's what we're going to try to understand. We're going to try to figure this out together. Now, I want to begin by just reminding you of where the story takes place. It happens in Bethsaida. And one of my secret goals for you as a congregation is that you understand biblical geography, and you can point out various places on a map when you read the Bible stories, the gospel stories in particular. So let's take a look at the map of the Holy Land. And this area to the north is called the Galilee. This area in the center is called Samaria in the time of Christ. And this area to the south is called Judea. Right in this area, we find the city of Jerusalem. This is the Sea of Galilee, this is the Jordan River, and this is the Dead Sea, Mediterranean Sea over here. All right, so let's just zoom in a little closer to the Sea of Galilee to find out where the story takes place. It takes place at Bethsaida, which is right here. Now, Bethsaida is at the base of the Golan Heights, which are all heading up in this direction here. And Jesus' home base during his 3 years of public ministry was in Capernaum, right over here. And what happened is, on this particular occasion, Jesus said to his disciples, let's get away from the crowds for a while. And they got into a boat, and they set sail across the Sea of Galilee. And they probably followed the shoreline fairly closely and ended up here. And Bethsaida, at the time, we think the Sea of Galilee actually came up a little further to the north. And they got off their boat, and they intended to sup somewhere around here to have a day of rest together. But the problem is, when you're going across the Sea of Galilee like this, all of the people who live in this area can see that little boat going across the Sea of Galilee. It's really not hard. When you're standing there, you can tell all the small boats going across the lake. Not that many on the lake. They see Jesus is heading that direction, and what do? They decide to go where Jesus is going. They want to see where Jesus is going. They want to be with Jesus. They want to hear from Jesus. They want to have their loved ones healed by Jesus. And so Jesus has gone to take a day of rest apart with his disciples. And instead, thousands of people flock to where they are. And they show up there about the time that Jesus and his disciples show up. So here's a little bit of the context of what's happening. Oh, by the way, let me just show you what this place looks like. There are two possible towns or sets of ruins that vie for which is Bethsaida. We're not really sure which, but the place that the state of Israel has called Bethsaida is this. Let's run the video. And I've been here a couple of times. Some of you have been there with me. This is a tell or a hill where the old ruins, and you see in the background the Sea of Galilee, and you see the hillside to the right, and we think to the right might have been where the crowds gathered to eat. This 5,000 people gathered that Jesus fed along the hillside. You can picture them there, and it's a sort of remote place. You don't see any of their villages around them. So the context for this within the scriptures, Jesus has sent out his disciples, the 12, 2 by 2. He sent them out to heal and to cast out demons and to teach about the kingdom of God. So they were out. We don't know how long they did this for, but presumably several weeks. They come back, and they're excited to see Jesus, and they're exhausted. They've given themselves completely to the people for several weeks. Jesus, meanwhile, has not only been ministering to the crowds, but he's just discovered that his friend, his companion, and his cousin, John the Baptist, has been beheaded. And so Jesus is grieving and experiencing a sadness, while at the same time undoubtedly a sense of burnout. And so this is what he says according to Mark's gospel. He tells his disciples, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And so they go to get away from the crowds. They get in their boat. They head over to Bethsaida. Why Bethsaida? Well, this was the hometown of Simon, Peter, of Andrew, and Philip. And so maybe it was for that reason they're heading this direction. He's going to have a day off with them. Have you ever felt burned out, just exhausted? Like you just need a personal day, or you need a day of vacation, or you need to get away because you have given everything you have at your workplace or at other people or to your kids, and you've got nothing left, and that's what they're feeling. And they show up over here, and when they get there, there are 5,000 people waiting. What are they feeling at this time? Are they excited? Are they happy? I'm guessing the disciples were not happy. I'm guessing the disciples were frustrated. Like, really, seriously? You can't let us have one day by ourselves? And yet Jesus responds in this way. Mark tells us that Jesus had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Luke tells us that he welcomed them, spoke to them about God's kingdom, and healed those who were sick. The story reminds me of something. So as you think about the story, there's about 4 different ways that you could preach this text. So one of those might be to focus on this idea of being weary and grieving and burned out, and yet, still needing to give yourself to other people. And some people would read this story today and say Jesus didn't have very good boundaries, that he could have just said, sorry, folks, I'm off today, can't help you. But he didn't do that. Instead, he was concerned for the people who were there. And this is one thing we notice in Jesus' ministry is Jesus is always paying attention. And much of the most important things that happen in Jesus' ministry are the interruptions that happen when he was planning on doing something else. And I'm going to suggest to you that the same is true in our lives today. I think it was John Lennon who wrote in a song, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. And this is what I find in my own life. I have one day off a week. My day off is Monday. And so usually I try to protect that pretty carefully to try to get stuff done that I need to get done for LaVon and spend time with her and time to just recoup. But Monday I got a phone call that one of our founding members was in the hospital. She was in ICU and she might not make it through the night. And so, of course, I wanted to go see her. I wanted to be with her. But it kind of threw a wrench in all of my things I thought I was going to get done that day. And LaVon was great about it. She's like, no, you need to go. So I went down to KU Med Center to the ICU and sat with her, and we had a great visit. And it was interesting. one of the most important things that happened in my life last week was showing up on my day off to be with this woman in the ICU. I was so grateful that I did. She's still alive, although she may pass in the next day or two. I was with her last night at Hospice House, but that was the last time I had a chance to have a conversation with her because she can't talk anymore. She's mostly just sleeping. And how glad I was that I got the call. But when I first got the call, I thought, I got a million other things to get done. Here's what I'm saying, is pay attention to the interruptions. Because sometimes the most important things happen in the interruptions. The most important miracle story of Jesus that shows up in addition to the resurrection in all the Gospels is one that happened when Jesus was busy with other plans to have a day of retreat and quiet time away. Occasionally, Levon will send me for groceries at the grocery store. So I've shared some of this with you before. So a couple weeks ago, I went to the grocery store. Right after work, she said, I just need these 3 things, just these 3 things. But I went in the grocery store, and I don't go very often, so when I walked through the aisles, I was like, wow, look at all this cool stuff they have at the grocery store. So I'm walking through the aisles, I'm finding stuff I want, and picked up, $100 worth of stuff. And that wasn't the thing that set me so far back, because I was an hour late getting home that night. It was, when I walked through the grocery store, part of what I realized is there are people around, and I need to pay attention. And so, the first person caught me as I was walking in from the parking lot and began to talk to me. Hey, Pastor Adam, and shared something with me. And, several other people, hey, Pastor Adam, it's good to see you. And then, one person who came up to say, I was really hoping I'd have a chance to talk to you sometime. And then poured out their heart, and something they were walking through that was painful and difficult. And they're in Hen House or Hy-Vee or Price Chopper. I think I've covered all the major chains there. We stopped and prayed right in the aisle. And what I've come to recognize is that, often those are what we call God incidences, not just coincidences. And so paying attention, might be the most important thing that I did all that day was praying with that person standing in the aisle at the grocery store. So I want to encourage you to pay attention. Jesus paid attention. He didn't just send the people away. He paid attention. Here's the second thing I would encourage you. If we were preaching this sermon a different way, we might look at how this story parallels the stories in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. So many of the things that Jesus does are paralleled by things that happen in the Hebrew Bible. So in 2 Kings, there's a story of Elisha, who was one of the great prophets of Israel. There was Elijah and Elisha. And Elisha had 100 people who were there, and he was tasked with feeding them. He only had 20 loaves of bread to feed those 100 people. 20 loaves of bread, but somehow miraculously, he was able to feed all 100 people with 20 loaves of bread, and afterwards, they had leftovers. Does that sound familiar to you? Sounds a little bit like the story we have here, except for Jesus didn't have 20 loaves of bread to feed 100 people. He had 5 loaves of bread to feed 5,000 people. What does that tell you about Jesus and Elisha? Like maybe one greater than Elisha was in our midst, right? This story is a parallel, but it's pointing towards what God does sometimes with the little that we have. Or we might look at it in terms of Moses. So much of Jesus' life is paralleled in Moses' story. So Moses leads the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and he leads them towards the promised land. When they're in the wilderness, they spend 40 years there. And you remember the first thing that people start grumbling about? What are we going to eat? Moses, what are we going to eat out here? And Moses goes to God and God, like, really, what are they going to eat? Help me here. And God says, don't worry about it. I got it covered. At night, there's going to be a dew that falls on the ground. When you wake up in the morning, you're going to see a white crystalline kind of substance on the ground, like coriander. You're gonna pick it up. Your people are gonna pick it up, and then they're gonna be able to grind it, and they're gonna make bread out of it, and that's what they're gonna eat for the next 40 years. They called it manna. Do you remember what manna means? In Hebrew, it means what's that stuff? That is what it means. It means what's that? And so they ate what's that for the next 40 years. But God provided for the people in the wilderness in a deserted place. God provided for them so that they were no longer hungry. Jesus is with these people in a deserted place outside of Bethsaida, and the people come, and Jesus provides for them food, right? So it's hearkening back to the Moses story in the wilderness and how God provided for the people. But Jesus then takes this. This whole thing is sort of a setup where he's going to teach them something about himself. So in John chapter 6, in the telling of the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus goes on to reference Moses, and he says this, I am the bread of life. Like you've just eaten bread and fish, but I want you to know I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, and yet they died. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. So the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 was a way of pointing towards something else, a deeper truth that Christ satisfies the deepest longings of our heart, and he offers us life not only here and now, but life eternal in his kingdom. So when we take the Eucharist is one way of saying, I'm receiving Christ, the bread of life, and he is satisfying the deepest yearnings and longings of my heart for meaning and purpose, love, joy, grace, hope. That's what Jesus brings. And the giving of bread and fish was just a way of pointing towards a deeper truth. All right, so those are ways that we might preach this sermon, but I really want to focus on a different dimension of this story. And it is seen in Luke chapter 9, beginning with verse 13. Listen to these words. When the day was almost over, so Jesus had been teaching and preaching and healing all day long. When the day was almost over, the 12 came to him, the disciples, and said, "Send the crowd away so that they can go to the nearby villages and countryside and find lodging and food because we are in a deserted place." I want to pause there for a second. I mean, I'm guessing the disciples were waiting to say that all day long. Like, Jesus, please just send them away. I mean, we need some time. Can we just at least have the evening together? Maybe that's what they're thinking. I don't know. Maybe they really are earnestly concerned that there isn't enough food for everybody and they've got a long distance to walk. The distance to walk from Capernaum to Bethsaida is about 2 hours. From Bethsaida to Tiberias, it's about 4 hours, maybe 5 hours. And so they got a ways to go if they're going back home. So Jesus, please send them away. And Jesus replied, will you say this with me? Let's say it together. Jesus said, you give them something to eat. Did you catch that? That's the point of the sermon today. Okay, it's very simple. Jesus said to the disciples, you give them something to eat. Now in John's account, Philip speaks up and Philip says, Lord, we can't give them something to eat. It would take 6 months' wages. That wouldn't even be enough to feed all of these people. And then Jesus says, well, just bring me what you have. Like, it's an impossible task. Bring me what you have. And so they brought him what little they had. You remember they had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Smoked fish, dried fish, we don't know. And they bring this to Jesus. So like, yeah, Jesus, this is what we got. Now would you just please send them away? No, I'm not going to do that. And then listen, he takes the bread, he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it to the disciples and says, now go give this to the people. Now, it's hard to picture in my mind how this miracle actually works. So we have the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and it feeds 5,000 people. So did they have baskets, and miraculously there's just more bread shows up in the basket, they tear it away, and there's more that shows up and more fish? And I don't know. I mean, that's the way it's read, the way it reads in the Gospels. So that may be exactly how it happened, probably is how it happened. But, you know, some scholars read the story and they wonder if there wasn't another kind of miracle that was also taking place, that of those 5,000 people, there had to be some who actually planned in advance. There had to be women who were there with the men who planned in advance. And they brought, you know, baskets of food to share because the guys weren't thinking about it. And so there was food that some of them had, and they were going to keep it to themselves. But instead of keeping it to themselves, they watched Jesus and the disciples give everything they had to feed other people. They heard Jesus say, you know, give away what you have to feed other people. And all of a sudden their hearts were changed. And then some of those people opened up their picnic baskets and decided that they'd give away what they had, and others gave away what they had. And some who lived in Bethsaida ran to the town and got all the food they could find in their cupboards, and they brought it out too. So there was probably some combination of something supernatural that was happening and then something miraculous that was happening in the hearts of people, where instead of trying to hoard what they had and keep it to themselves, they decided to give away whatever they had. And you get to the end of the meal, and you remember the disciples had all of this food left over when they all gave what they had. So this is this beautiful story about taking the loaves and the fish that you have, what little bit you have, and giving it to God, surrendering that to God to be used to help feed somebody else, to help somebody else with their needs, and then how God multiplies that, and somehow everybody is satisfied in the end. There's an old gospel song, it's not that old, probably 30, 40 years old. Dolores, her nickname is Mom Winans, wrote this song. It's called Ordinary People. And the first 2 lines, it's all about this story. It goes like this, you've probably heard it before. Just ordinary people. God uses ordinary people. He chooses people just like me and you who are willing to do as he commands. God uses people that will give him all, no matter how small your all may seem to you, because little becomes much as we place it in the Master's hands. This week I went to have lunch at Thelma's Kitchen at 31st and Troost. I don't know if you've been down that way recently. A lot of changes happening in that area, and a really great place to eat at Thelma's Kitchen. So I went down there and had a chance to sit with Father Justin Matthews, an Orthodox priest who runs reconciliation services there, which is a ministry that's aimed at bringing healing in what has been a blighted and hurt, wounded part of our city. Troost has been the historic dividing line between people, rich and poor, black and white, and long before that even, I learned this week. And so in this place, they have created a ministry to bring reconciliation among people, to heal the divisions in our races, genders, socioeconomic status, to heal the divisions that happen among people, even of the same people groups. We find divisions. To bring healing in mental health to people who have been traumatized and experienced pain, children who grew up in homes where there were no parents, people who lived in communities where there was violence. All of these are issues that are being faced here. And Reconciliation Services was designed to try to bring healing there. But in the front of Reconciliation Services is Thelma's Kitchen, a really awesome place to eat, a place I hope you'll stop by and eat soon. And I wanted you to hear just a little bit about their vision for Thelma's Kitchen and what they're doing. This is Father Justin Matthews. Take a listen.
So Thelma's Kitchen is a gathering place for everyone in the community, East and West, black and white, rich and poor, trying to bring people together again, which is the foundation for a relationship. When people come in, they're gonna say, welcome to Thelma's, have you been here before? If you have money, you can donate the suggested price or pay it forward by donating more. If you don't have that much, you can donate what you can. We have a minimum of $3, but if you don't have $3, we're not gonna turn you away. We actually ask you to volunteer and help us run the restaurant for about a half hour. And in that way, no one walks away hungry, and we're extending the kind of care and affordability that the community really needs in order to reveal its strength.
And your food is great. It is 5 stars on Yelp, right?
We're a 5-star Yelp-rated restaurant on Truce.
That's awesome. This really actually is delicious. This is a great meal. So when people are working, they're donating their time, what are they doing?
So people come in, whether they're homeless or whether they work in the area, and anybody has the opportunity to volunteer. When folks are what we call walk-in volunteers, they're doing things like bussing tables or helping keep the neighborhood clean. We have hundreds of volunteers every year who actually help us run the restaurant. We only have 2 full-time staff, so we rely on volunteers from every walk of life. Every meal that we serve is actually providing for case management, social services, trauma therapy, and food for the community. You know, I love where Jesus says to the disciples, you give them something to eat, and requiring of them to have the faith and even to find the resources to be able to do the work of the gospel.
I love this, that by breaking bread together, they're bringing healing to the community, reconciling people to each other as you break bread with people who maybe you've never met before. As you're paying for your food, you're making possible ministries that are happening to bring healing to other folks. People can come in who can't afford anything and give their time, and it begins to paint a picture of the kind of meals that Jesus broke with, or bread that Jesus broke with people. And I want to encourage you to stop by 31st and Troost and to have a meal at Thelma's Kitchen. I want to encourage you to donate if you can, more than enough for your meal, so you might pay for someone else's meal. And then I want to encourage you to think about getting involved there. I think Father Matthews is with us today. Are you here somewhere, Justin? Father Justin? Right back. Would you stand? Thank you for the great work that you are doing. And I'm hoping, if you're interested in finding out more, can you stick around for a few minutes after worship and just stay right over here in this area? Come by and see him. Find out more about it. I'd love to see you get plugged in and involved in this ministry that is changing our city. It's awesome. So I asked Father Justin, tell me, how many clients do you serve over the course of a year? You know how many he said? Just take a guess, based on the biblical story we talked about today. 5,000. 5,000 clients, 25,000 meals. I just thought, how cool is that? This is this story being lived out in the heart of our community. All right, so as we were talking, he was telling me about Thelma, that's named after Thelma's Kitchen. You saw a picture of her in their mural there. And so he was telling me the story of Thelma. Thelma lived around the 31st and Troost area. She lived in Section 8 housing. She was an African-American woman. I looked like she was about 4'9", 4'10", pretty short. And lived in Section 8 housing, but had a heart for the people who were there who were homeless and had less than she had. And so when she saw somebody who needed something to eat, she would invite them into her home and she would prepare a meal for them. And this became a pattern in her life, whether it was people who were homeless or prostitutes or people who were struggling just to make ends meet. Anybody who was hungry, she would take them into her apartment. She would feed them. And as this word got around that there was this woman who was doing what Jesus literally said, you give them something to eat, out of the little that she had. There was a fellow who lived out in South Johnson County, in Leawood or Overland Park. I think he might have lived in Leawood. His name was David. And David was a young guy. He was in financial services. Thelma was pretty short. David was really tall. It looked like he was about 6'3" or so. And he heard about this, and he started taking groceries down to Thelma to help her feed people. And then he began helping her prepare food, and they began serving even more people and began to have dreams about how they could prepare a building where they could serve even more people than that. In the process of doing this, these two people, 6'3" and 4'9" or 10, and 10 years difference in age, fell in love with each other. Oh, this is a picture of them. This is David and Thelma. David eventually left his job in the suburbs, and he and Thelma bought this building where Thelma's kitchen is today, and they moved into part of it, and they opened up the kitchen. They called it Grace's Kitchen, and they invited people to come and eat. More people come and eat. I love this. You know, David brought what he had to bring to the table, and Thelma brought what she had to bring to the table. And eventually, David felt called to ministry. I mean, years later, he felt called to be a priest. He was already in ministry, but felt called to be a priest in the Greek Orthodox tradition, and went to seminary. And here's a picture of them. This is, you can tell, years have gone by now. And Father Alexei, and is how he's known now, and Thelma. Thelma died in 2012 and left a huge mark on this city, a woman who lived in Section 8 housing who transformed her community. But she took the little she had, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and she gave it away. And somehow she was filled, and there was joy, and she found life in that. So later, after Thelma had passed, Grace's Kitchen was renamed and transformed to what it is today, renamed Thelma's Kitchen in honor of her. And you see there when you walk in this mural of her. This is the image that's there in the restaurant. And I love the halo behind her. You see that halo? And you know, she's a saint in this place. Father Justin said she's our saint. And I think about some of you have been in Orthodox buildings where there are icons, and often on the sidewalls there'll be icons of local saints. And this is the local saint here who inspires you when you walk in and when you hear her story. You know, she's once more beckoning as Jesus did. You give them something to eat. Are you paying attention? Are you willing to share the little that you have to be able to bless someone else? I'm reminded of the words of Isaiah, who said this, what is it that God is looking for, he asked. Is he not looking for you to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, which was what Thelma was doing? Covering the naked when you see them? Is he not looking for you to stop hiding from your own family who are in need? If you do those things, then your light will break out like the dawn, and you will be healed quickly. Your own righteousness will walk before you, and the Lord's glory will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and God will say, I'm here. So you do these things, you care for people who are in need, and you're going to find that God is there for you. Well, how is God there for you? Like, I've never had God show up as an angel. I mean, not a winged, ultra, glorious figure. I've never heard God's audible voice, though I hear God speaking in my heart a lot, and in my mind, the whisper of God. The way God usually shows up to help me is through other people. So here's how it works. You give what you have away. You share with other people in need. You stop to help people. And what you find is that blessing comes back to you, and other people are also giving to eat to those who are in need. You become the one who's the recipient. Somehow in this exchange of blessing to be a blessing and giving and receiving, we find all of our needs are met. This is how it works. Now, this miracle I see all the time is you're feeding people here at Resurrection, literally food at certain times. So we have our Super Bowl food drive. We just had it a few weeks ago. You brought in 15 tons of food in groceries that you actually carried in here from the grocery store. And then you gave $53,000, which at Harvesters at 16 cents a pound would purchase another up to 300,000 or 300 tons of food, right? So now there's 315 tons of food potentially. What we do is we put that on deposit for area food pantries, and then they can purchase the food that they need, cheese at one point, or meat, or vegetables, or whatever it might be, and we have a chance to share what we had with other people. So we have a team of people who volunteer to go and deliver this food as it's needed. We store it and then deliver it wherever it's needed. And I thought you might enjoy hearing from some of these folks, because these are people who have heard God say, Jesus say to them, you give them something to eat, and they're taking what you gave and giving it to others. Take a listen.
Today we've got 9 pallets and about 1,200 pounds in each pallet, so close to 5 tons.
There is a food shortage for a lot of people, and this just helps tremendously for those individuals and families that need that food during the week, that they can come to these pantries, and these pantries are really awesome.
Most of this food came from the Super Bowl food drive that we had right around after Christmas. And some of it's purchased food that we've got from the cash donations that people gave, and then also the food that people dropped off at the church. Well, it's obvious when you go into some of these neighborhood food pantries and see the empty shelves, and you see people in line waiting to get food, and you talk to the food pantry coordinators, and they feel like they're blessing us by their need, letting us, again, serve the community.
And on the back of our shirts, we have Matthew's 25, verse 35, that tells that story. So that's really why I got involved in I've been involved in it since, and it's kind of a passion.
Very blessed to be part of this church and have found this church that have such an outreach to the community, that are there to help people and to serve just as Jesus wanted us to do, serve people.
So on the back of their t-shirts, Matthew 25:35, it's the parable of the sheep and the goats where Jesus says, you know these words because you've heard me preach them many times. It's the last judgment, and he says to the sheep, those who go to heaven, he says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. You give them something to eat. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. When did we see you hungry, Lord? Every time you helped somebody else who was in need, I took it as you were helping me. Right? This is paying attention. It's the story of this feeding of the 5,000s. I want to give you one last illustration and then we'll close. So it's not always food that we're giving. When Jesus says you give them something to eat, sometimes it's intangible things. It's love, it's care, it's compassion. Sometimes it's counseling, or sometimes it's jobs, or a host of different things. So this week I had the privilege of burying my aunt, Carol Mitchell. We had the graveside service, and then we came here and had a memorial service. These flowers here are from her memorial service. This was Friday. A remarkable woman. I want to tell you just a little bit about her. So here's her picture, by the way, and she was a part of our congregation. She was a school teacher. She spent 34 years teaching school. She taught reading and English. And she taught at all levels. So she taught in Europe at NATO schools. When her first husband, they were deployed there. She taught elementary school, middle school, and high school, but her passion was middle school. So she taught in the Olathe School District, starting when they opened Frontier Trail Middle School. She taught there for 18 years. And for her, Jesus saying, you give them something to eat, was teaching children how to read and write. It was investing in these children and giving what she had. What she had to offer wasn't, bread and wine or fish. She had the capacity to teach people how to read. She did that for 18 years in Olathe, and then she retired when her granddaughter was born. Her first grandchild, Lily, was born. That was about 13 or 14 years ago, and she decided she would pour into her grandchildren. There was Lily, and then Braden came along. But as she was caring for her grandchildren, she also felt that there was more that she had, more capacity she had to give, and so she began working with our partner school at Quindaro. We have 9 partner elementary schools throughout Kansas City in the lowest income communities, and we offer tutoring, and we rehab the schools and provide books and free beds and all kinds of stuff at each of these schools. So she began working in Quindaro, and she began going there to tutor children. These kids are coming into school a grade level behind, sometimes 2 grade levels behind, and she begins teaching and tutoring them. She's retired, but she's giving her time to do this. And then she moves beyond that she continues that, and she volunteers with the bookmobile, and our bookmobile is parked outside here today, and today you have a chance to buy books for the bookmobile after the service is over with. And last year you gave away about 67,000 books to children here in Kansas City, and so she starts providing books, and then she starts going to volunteer to make sure the children she was teaching how to read and write could have a book to read when they got home. And then she decided at some point, it's not just little children, there's other people who need to know how to read and write. And so she went down to volunteer at Hope Faith in Kansas City, Missouri with homeless people. And she begins teaching these guys how to read and write. Some of these guys for the first time learning how to write their own name. Then when some of those folks went to start the same ministry in Kansas City, Kansas through Avenue of Life, she went to join them over there. And she continued to teach men how to read and write. One day she was walking in, the first time she went to volunteer at Hope Faith, she walked in and there was a man named Andre, who a real tall guy. He had his own share of struggles in life, and he now was working at Hope Faith, and he was the person who helped volunteers get connected. And so Andre takes Carol around to see Hope Faith, and he says, so what do you do? And she says, well, I'm retired, but I'm a school teacher. And he said, oh, that's great. And he says, I always dreamt of going to college when I was younger, but that's just not in the cards for me. She said, well, why not? Why can't you go to college? He said, I couldn't pass the entrance exams for one thing. And then, I don't have the resources to do that. She said, I could help you pass the entrance exams. And they went to take the entrance exams and he failed. He wasn't able to get in. And she said, you know what, we can work on this. And so she tutored him until he went back and he took the entrance exams and he got into Metropolitan Community College. And he said, well, that's great, but I can't pay for school. She said, I'm gonna pay for your school. It's interesting, I didn't know this story. I mean, all these years she's been my aunt, I didn't know that she'd done this until after she died, I heard this story. She paid for his community college. He said, she helped me pass English, 2 English courses I wouldn't have passed When I couldn't get through math, she found somebody at Resurrection who taught math, and he came and tutored me in math. She helped me with my speech class. She edited all of my papers that I turned in, and she helped me graduate, and she paid for my college to graduate with my associate's degree. Then I got to go on to get my bachelor's degree, and this spring he's graduating with his bachelor's in business. So I saw him. I hadn't seen him in years, and I saw him at the visitation on Friday or on Thursday night. And I didn't know who it was at first. I saw this really giant of a man. He walks in and he walks up to where the pictures are. He greeted the family and he walks up to where the pictures were of Carol, and I see him starting to sob. And then he turned around and I thought, that's Andre. And so I went and I gave him a big hug and I said, hey, sit down here, man. Tell me the impact Carol had on your life. And he starts telling me the story. And I thought, all that happened with an interruption. It was just a conversation that she had as he was taking her on a tour of the building. And she thought, I have something to offer you. I can help. And his life was fundamentally changed by one woman who said, here I am, Lord, use me. I want to ask, are you paying attention to the people that God brings across your path, to the moments and the days, to the little bit that you have to offer? She was a school teacher. She wasn't somebody who made $100,000 a year. She was a school teacher. But she took what she had and the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and she helped a young man make it through college. I mean, it's an amazing story. And her story, I think, is meant to be our story. By the way, one last thing about Carol. One day, 4 or 5 years ago, we were walking out from church, and I walked her out to her car, and she told me, she said, Adam, I have a liver disease, and it's gonna claim my life. I think she was 68 at the time when she told me this. And she said, the doctor said I need a liver transplant, but she said, I'm not gonna accept a liver transplant. In fact, I told the doctor, said, there are younger people who need that organ. And I've lived 68 years. I've lived a good life already. I don't need to take that. I want someone else to have it. I'm not suggesting that should be your answer. I would have told her, I tried to tell her, take the organ. But for her, this was one more chance she had to give them something to eat, for a younger person to have a chance at a long life. She lived 4 years after that, and an amazing witness to Christ. You give them something to eat. Here's where we end. At the end of the story, Luke tells us everyone there was satisfied, and there were how many baskets full of food left over, do you remember? 12 baskets full of food, one for each of the apostles. They reluctantly gave up what little bit they had, and they had more than enough at the end, and they were all satisfied, which is how it works when we give what we have, and then we find the blessings returning, which is why Carol went back and volunteered again and again, because she found she was filled up by serving. It's why the people show up at Thelma's kitchen and they give themselves to serving there, because they find themselves filled up when they're giving someone else something to eat. We end with this. The early church looked at this story, and the reason why they found it so compelling in part was they saw the feeding of the 5,000 as foreshadowing what happened in the Eucharist. That there were thousands of people. They were sinners, they were broken, they were messed up people, but all those people, Jesus fed them all. He took them all in and he fed them all. And when they looked at the Eucharist, they remembered. You remember these things? Jesus said to the disciples, he took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it to them, right? And then they shared it with all those people. What did he say at the Last Supper? He took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it to the disciples. Take and eat, this is my body for you. In the feeding the 5,000, I am the living bread. And so when they looked at this story and they looked at the Eucharist, every time they received the Eucharist, they felt like they were part of that crowd of 5,000 on the hillside in Bethsaida. Once more, Jesus is feeding me. And he's reminding me, you give them something to eat. Let's pray. Lord, at times we're weary, tired, preoccupied, even burned out. We don't want to give anybody anything else. We've given up all we can. We just need some quiet time alone with you. But in those times especially, help us to pay attention, to have compassion, to serve, to listen for your call. Help us, oh Lord, to hear your words once more today. You give them something to eat, like Thelma and David, Carol, and so many others. Direct our hearts to share the gifts and abilities and resources you've given to us so that we might bless others and in the process find ourselves satisfied. Lord, as you fed the multitudes with bread and fish, we pray you would feed our hearts with the bread of life by which we'll never hunger again. Fill us, Lord, as we receive you in the bread of Holy Communion. We love you, O Lord, in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you for watching this week's sermon. We'd love for you to join us again online or live in worship. To learn more about Church of the Resurrection, please visit core.org. Have a great week.